The coalition's campaign might seem in some quarters to be running out of puff, with some late poll numbers swinging in Labour's favour. But there are still a few weeks to go, so can they turn this around? Let's bring in tonight's Political Insiders panel. Joining me is former senior Liberal advisor David Gazzard and former Labour advisor Darren Barnett. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me tonight. Now, David Gazzard, I'm going to start with you. There is some concern among Liberals about whether Peter Dutton, let's be frank, is in a position to win this. It's still 3 weeks to go, but the momentum has been running against the coalition. Is it possible for Peter Dutton to win? And what's his path through? What does he need to do to turn some of these poll numbers, which have just been a slow drip of bad news for the coalition, around?
Look, there's a number of things to unpack with that. James, it's a really interesting question. Somewhere at some point in time, there is going to be some pollsters that are either spectacularly right or spectacularly wrong. It reminds me a lot of 2019, where I recall going to Kirribilli House on the night of the election, and Sam Dastyari was on TV saying he had not seen one piece of polling data that would suggest that Bill Shorten would lose that election. And of course, we all know what happened there. All I can say is that both parties, I think their numbers are different from the national polls. Mm-hmm. They are measuring more accurately in the seats that really matter. And they are way more across the things that are going to move the needle. So, you know, it's obviously Western Sydney and those outer metro belt seats down into Victoria, some in WA, that are critical for the coalition. And I don't think that's being measured in the national polls, the sentiment of those people on the streets in Liverpool, in Werriwa, of all places. Mm-hmm. Gough Whitlam's old seat is where the campaign launch was held today for the Liberal Party. So the concerns there, the bread and butter issues, and you've seen it with housing, you've seen it with a tax cut, you've seen it with the ute tax stuff. These are all things that are going to move the needle, not some of the stuff that the national press want.
Yeah, and look, these are the bread and butter issues, and these are the things people want to be talking about, cost of living. But Darren, you know, you've been inside the room, and I want to turn this question around onto you. Labor right now is looking good. They weren't looking good at the start of the campaign, but they've had a strong campaign. Anthony Albanese has come across far more prepared and professional than he did, I think, in 2022. If you were in the Labour camp right now, if you were in their campaign headquarters, what would be the thing that you would be most concerned about knocking you guys off your game?
Oh, I think it's more an inverse question, but I will answer it. Every day so far has been about either Peter Dutton, Donald Trump, or both. And every day that it's about that combination is a good day for Labor. And as David mentioned, the 2019 campaign, Scott Morrison very cleverly made the campaign about Bill Shorten and his policies. So if you're in government and you can make it about your opponent rather than yourself, you put yourself in a better position. And at the moment, the zeitgeist, plus probably a little bit of campaign manoeuvring, the story has not yet been about the government, it's been about Peter Dutton.
Yeah, and I mean, that's always the thing, personalise your opponent. That's almost the first rule of campaigning. But you mentioned Donald Trump and MAGA there, and I want to come to you, David, because certain corners of the media are now really pushing this Trump coalition connection. And this week, Jacinta Price was speaking at a rally in Perth, and oh my God, shock, horror, she said this.
I'm so proud to be able to stand beside and to ensure that we can make Australia great again, that we can bring Australia back to its former glory, that we can get Australia back on track.
And like clockwork, a new picture has dropped from Jacinta Price's personal photo collection of her and her husband, oh no, wearing MAGA hats at Christmas. David Gazzard, how much of this is a storm in a teacup, and how much of this is actually going to really make people think that Peter Dutton is some sort of like Timu Trump who is going to bring all these sorts of MAGA policies to Australia?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, we've seen two things that have occurred over the course of really the faux election campaign and the actual election campaign. One of those was the cyclone in Brisbane, benefits the incumbent. The second has been the conflagrations from the United States with Donald Trump putting tariffs on, and there's a worldwide resistance to the President of the United States. So perish the thought that someone would say, make Australia great again. I mean, that must mean that you're automatically going to follow everything that Donald Trump does, which is silly and sort of asinine, but that's part of the assertion politics that's going on now. There is, I think, going back to your previous question, both of those major shocks have benefited the incumbent and Anthony Albanese, but the idea that the coalition is going to turn into Donald Trump, sort of marked Donald Trump redux is silly. Jacinta Price is one of the leading lights of the coalition. She's an Indigenous woman, and she was a star throughout the Voice campaign. So I don't think anyone will be particularly concerned about that, but it does show you the febrile environment where, from the Prime Minister down, saying make Australia great again must mean that you're a Donald Trump sycophant.
Yeah, exactly. It is a little bit overheated. And Darren, I wrote earlier this week in the Daily Telegraph that if Donald Trump didn't exist, Anthony Albanese would almost have to invent him because he's such a useful foil to tag the coalition with and tag Peter Dutton with. What do you make of it?
100% agree with that. It's the world has favoured Anthony Albanese in that sense of Trump being a little bit crazier than people thought he might have been. I think what happens with the MAGA comment, 4 months ago, I think the coalition would have made Jacinta Price much more front and centre. They would have made any kind of Doge equivalent much more front and centre. The times have changed. And for Dutton to win, he's got to appeal to the centre. You've still got to appeal to your flank. I get that. And that's what Jacinta Price's role is. But the campaign is not the one they were intending to run 4 months ago, and she's not as central to what that campaign would have been. And so it's a bit of a smoke signal that perhaps voters might look at it and say, hey, hang on, that's what you guys really want to do. And that's why it's a problem.
Yeah, and we saw last week there was that funny image of Jacinta Price behind Peter Dutton. You just saw sort of the top of her head sticking out over his shoulder. But on to other matters here, because this is a big important one here. It's about Greens' preferences. The Prime Minister has shut down further questioning over whether Labor will run more open tickets this election after McNamara MP Josh Burns said that he would not preference the Greens because of their stance on Israel. Here's what Anthony Albanese had to say about this.
You know what the Labor Party wants? We want a number one next to the name of all these people. That's my concern. That's my concern. If people put a number one next to Labor and we finish first or second, all the rest doesn't matter.
David Gizzard, I think that this is a huge weakness for Labor right now, that people don't know what they're going to wind up getting because they still don't really rule out, some sort of alliance or something. And people with long memories will remember what happened in 2010 with Julia Gillard and the Greens.
And it goes back further than that, James. But let's be very clear about this. I mean, it is a position we're in now where the Labor Party may be governing with a party that is in full support of Hamas and Hezbollah, and is quite outspoken in that. And so what Josh Burns, a Jewish man in the seat of McNamara, has done is said he's running a split ticket. Now, contrast the position of the Labor Party in 1998, 2001, 2004, and on and on. It's only really now become acceptable for the coalition to take the preferences of One Nation or to do a preference exchange with One Nation, because Pauline Hanson had the temerity to say back in the 90s, in 1996, that Australia was flooded with Chinese or Asian immigration. That was what she said. We now have the Prime Minister of this country shutting down debate about doing a preference deal with a party that supports prescribed terrorist outfits. So you can see how far this country has come, and you can see the mental gymnastics that the Labor Party is doing in this campaign. And why? Well, we know that at the last election, they got 32% of the primary vote. They're somewhere near that same position. So 2 out of every 3 Australians will probably not lodge their first preference vote with the Labor Party. They need every preference they can get to get back into government, And part of that will be the 10, 12, 14% that comes from the Greens. So they'll be preferencing the Greens no matter who they support in the Middle East.
Well, yeah, and Darren, this does seem to be kind of an Achilles heel here for Labor. I mean, why is the Prime Minister so testy? He gets very testy whenever he gets asked about this sort of thing. You know, he's been in Parliament saying, oh, the Greens aren't a serious party, blah, blah, blah. But now that there's a real possibility that they might need the Greens, he's still trying to keep his options open. And I think that'll be scaring off a fair few voters.
I think what is definitely true is that it's now, 8 weeks ago, there was a possibility, and I've said this before, there was a bigger chance of a coalition majority than a Labor majority. Now those positions have reversed, but it's still far, far, far more likely that we're going to get minority government.
Yeah.
Now, the preferences are one thing, but who do you then form your government with is another. Having been part of that Gillard administration,
yes,
I can guarantee you that we don't want it to be with the Greens, but who can say? We're just going to have to wait and see how the votes fall. But preference deals, they're always grubby, they're always behind closed doors, and that goes for every party, not just Labor.
But, I mean, as David Gazzard said, the Greens have some very extreme positions when it comes to Israel. Plenty of people like Josh Frydenberg have said this is an anti-Semitic party. How can Labor, even countenance being in some sort of coalition with them?
Well, I think they'd prefer not to be. So we're kind of looking at it hypothetically. They can't. They're probably going to say, oh, we won't govern in coalition with the Greens. We'll just have to wait and see what happens with the votes. But people should be very wise about what they're voting for.
Absolutely, they should. Hey, I want to move on to one last topic here. There was a big swipe from Defence Minister Richard Marles at his Liberal counterpart, Andrew Hastie. He said that Andrew Hastie was not fit for the role of Defence Minister because of his views on women in military combat roles. Have a listen.
I think it is untenable that he is saying, in respect of 460 servicewomen who meet the criteria to participate in combat roles, that despite the fact that they meet the criteria, because they are women, they should not be able to serve in that role. They should not be able to do that job. It's 2025.
Well, David Gazzard, it's 2025 indeed, and 2025 is a pretty dangerous year. I would think that the biggest concern would be that the defense forces have the capability to kill the enemy. And, I'm a little less concerned. I have all the respect in the world for women who serve in the military, but it seems to be fighting over these views seems to be a distraction from the main game of what the ADF is supposed to be about.
Look, I mean, it's frustrating, this debate. I mean, this has been with us for a long time. Should women serve at the front line? Of course, they should serve at the front line if they've got the capability to do that. But, I mean, can they carry out a wounded soldier who might be 200 pounds? Well, that's arguable, right? I think that's what Andrew Hastie is talking about as a former SAS soldier. So, I mean, this is a guy who knows what he's talking about. He's served he has served his country well, and it's an ongoing debate. Now, Darren is absolutely right. I mean, this has been an interesting thing to watch. When Donald Trump was elected and things sort of moved right, everyone thought this would cut against Anthony Albanese because the world seemed to be trending back to the right. But with the madness over tariffs and so on, it's become a positive for the Prime Minister. But remember, one of the things that was occurring at the time when all that was going on was the fires in LA, where it was clearly demonstrated that some of the the people working for the fire department couldn't carry people out of burning buildings. And they made no bones about not being able to do that. And they blamed the people for being in those burning buildings, saying they were in the wrong place. So that was met with outrage across the US. So I don't really think this is an attack on women. I think it's an attack on the strength, the necessary strength of a soldier working at the front line. And it's been a debate that's been going for as long as I can remember. Yeah,
exactly. And, Andrew Hastie has served in combat. He's a Special Forces veteran. I think I'd take his advice on these sorts of things. David Gazzard, Darren Burnett, going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much.